There are moments in life when pride becomes a burden too heavy to carry, and surrender becomes the bravest choice a person can make. Chen had learned this truth in the most unexpected place, on a basketball court where winning had once meant everything, and losing had become his greatest gift. What you're about to discover isn't just a story about competition. It's about the quiet sacrifices fathers make in the shadows, the kind that nobody sees until it's almost too late. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The gymnasium at Riverside Community Center smelled like old leather and floor polish, a scent that had soaked into the wooden floorboards over 3 decades of pickup games, youth leagues, and weekend tournaments. Every Thursday evening at 7 o'clock sharp, the same group of men gathered under the fluorescent lights for what they simply called the run. It wasn't an official league. There were no referees, no trophies, and no admission fees. Just 10 guys who loved basketball enough to carve out 2 hours from their busy lives to play the game they'd grown up with. Chen had been coming to the run for 6 years, ever since he'd moved to Riverside with his daughter Emma. Back then, she was only 3 years old, small enough to sit on the bleachers with her coloring books while her father played. Now she was 9, and on most Thursdays, she still came along, though these days she brought homework instead of crayons, her math worksheets spread across the wooden benches while the sound of squeaking sneakers and bouncing balls filled the air around her. Marcus was 34 years old, lean and quick, with the kind of athletic build that came from years of discipline rather than natural gifts. He'd played varsity basketball in high school, good enough to earn a spot on a small college team before a torn ACL ended any dreams of playing beyond that level. But he'd never lost his love for the game. On the court, he found something he couldn't find anywhere else in his life, a sense of freedom, of being present in his body and mind at the same time, of connecting with other men without needing to explain himself or apologize for existing. He worked as a logistics coordinator for a regional shipping company, the kind of job that paid the bills but never quite stretched far enough to cover everything Emma needed. After his wife Lauren died 4 years ago, a sudden aneurysm that took her from them in a single afternoon, Marcus had become both mother and father to Emma. He packed her lunches with careful attention to nutrition labels, braided her hair with YouTube tutorials playing on his phone, attended every parent-teacher conference, and somehow managed to keep their small 2-bedroom apartment clean enough that Child Protective Services wouldn't raise an eyebrow if they ever showed up unannounced. Life was a constant balancing act. Every dollar had a destination before it even hit his bank account. Rent, groceries, utilities, Emma's after-school program, her music lessons, new shoes every few months because kids grow faster than bank accounts can keep up. There was never anything left over. No emergency fund, no vacation savings, no cushion for when the car started making that grinding noise or when Emma needed glasses or when the heating bill doubled because winter came early and stayed late. But Thursday nights were his. For 2 hours, Marcus could forget about the stack of bills on the kitchen counter, the check engine light glowing on his dashboard, the way his boss had started looking at him lately like he was one budget cut away from unemployment. On the court, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the ball in his hands, the defender in front of him, and the rim waiting 10 feet above the hardwood. The other guys in the run were a mixed group. There was James, a high school history teacher who could drain 3-pointers like he was born doing it. There was Raphael, who owned an auto body shop and played defense like his life depended on it. There was Kevin, a firefighter with shoulders like a linebacker and a surprisingly soft touch around the basket. And then there was Michael Rivera. Michael had started coming to the run about 8 months ago, and from the moment he walked into the gym, everyone knew he was different. He arrived in a black Mercedes SUV that probably cost more than Marcus made in 2 years. His basketball shoes were always the latest model, pristine and perfectly white, the kind that cost $200 and were meant more for showing off than playing in. He wore designer athletic gear, compression sleeves with logos Marcus didn't recognize, and a watch that glinted under the gym lights every time he raised his arms to shoot. But it wasn't just his appearance that set him apart. It was the way he carried himself. Michael moved through the world like someone who was used to being important, used to people listening when he spoke, used to getting his way. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of natural athleticism that came from good genes and expensive personal trainers. At 39 years old, he was in better shape than men half his age. Within the first few weeks, everyone learned that Michael was the CEO of Riverside Technologies, a software company that had developed some kind of data analytics platform used by hospitals and insurance companies. Marcus didn't understand exactly what the company did, something about machine learning and predictive algorithms, but he understood that it was successful. Very successful. The kind of success that meant Michael could afford courtside seats to professional games, could take spontaneous weekend trips to ski resorts, could buy a new car because he was bored with the old one. Michael was also, by any objective measure, good at basketball. He had a reliable jump shot, decent handles, and the kind of court vision that came from playing organized ball for most of his life. But there was something else about Michael's game, something that grated on Marcus from the very beginning. Michael played like he expected to win. Not hoped to win, not wanted to win, but expected it as his natural right, as though the universe owed him victory the same way it had given him wealth and success in every other area of his life. And for the first few months Michael came to the run, that's exactly what happened. He won. A lot. The games were usually played to 15 points, winners stay on the court, and Michael's team seemed to stay on more often than not. He'd pump his fist after big shots, talk trash to defenders, and flash that confident smile that suggested he knew something everyone else didn't. Marcus noticed something else too. Michael never seemed to miss a Thursday. No matter what was happening in his business life, no matter what deals were closing or meetings were scheduled, he showed up at 7 o'clock ready to play. It was the kind of dedication that Marcus would have respected if it wasn't wrapped in so much arrogance. The turning point came on a Thursday in late September. The evening had started like any other. Emma sat in the bleachers working on a book report about Charlotte's Web, occasionally glancing up to watch her father play. Marcus had been having a good night. His shot was falling, his legs felt fresh, and his team had won 3 games in a row. They were up 14-12 in the 4th game, playing against Michael's team, just 1 basket away from another victory. Marcus had the ball at the top of the key. Michael was guarding him, crouched low in defensive stance, that familiar competitive glint in his eyes. Marcus made a quick move to his right, crossed the ball over to his left hand, and drove toward the basket. Michael stayed with him, but Marcus had half a step, just enough space to elevate and release a floater over Michael's outstretched hand. The ball arced through the air, spinning with perfect rotation, and dropped through the net without touching the rim. Game over. Marcus's team had won again. As they walked off the court, Michael clapped slowly, deliberately, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Nice shot, Marcus. You've been on fire tonight." There was something in his tone, something that wasn't quite congratulatory, but Marcus couldn't quite place it. He nodded, catching his breath, and grabbed his water bottle from the sideline. "Your daughter's getting big," Michael said, gesturing toward Emma. "She comes every week, right?" Marcus glanced over at Emma, who had looked up from her book report at the sound of her name. "Yeah, most weeks. Easier than finding a sitter." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "That's dedication. Both of you." He paused, then added, "You know, my company actually has a community outreach program. We sponsor educational initiatives, after-school programs, that kind of thing. Maybe there's something we could do for families in the area." Marcus felt a reflexive wariness rise in his chest. He'd learned long ago that when wealthy people started talking about helping communities, there was usually something they wanted in return. "That's good of you," he said neutrally. "I believe in giving back," Michael continued, taking a long drink from his designer water bottle. "Success isn't worth much if you're not using it to lift others up, you know?" There it was again, that tone. Not quite condescending, but definitely self-satisfied, like Michael was auditioning for a TED Talk about philanthropy. Marcus just nodded and turned his attention back to the next game forming on the court. But over the following weeks, something shifted. Marcus's game, which had been so strong that night in September, started to falter. His shots that had been falling consistently began clanging off the rim. His usually quick first step seemed slower. Defenders who he'd been blowing past for months suddenly seemed faster, more aggressive. And Michael seemed to be everywhere on the court, blocking shots, stealing passes, scoring with an ease that made Marcus feel like he was moving underwater. By mid-October, Marcus hadn't won a game in 3 straight weeks. Every Thursday, he'd show up, play his heart out, and watch as Michael's team stayed on the court game after game after game. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The other guys started to notice. Raphael pulled him aside one night and asked if everything was okay, if he was injured or sick. Marcus assured him he was fine, just in a slump, everyone goes through it. But it wasn't just a slump. Marcus could feel it in his body, a heaviness that hadn't been there before. He was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. His legs felt like they were filled with sand. His coordination was just slightly off, enough that passes he'd made 1,000 times were sailing over teammates' heads or bouncing off their hands. At first, he blamed it on stress. Work had been particularly demanding, with his boss implementing a new inventory system that required everyone to learn software that seemed designed to make simple tasks complicated. Emma had been struggling with multiplication tables, which meant helping her with homework took twice as long each night. And there was always the financial pressure, the constant mental calculation of which bills could be paid this week and which could be pushed to next week without serious consequences. But deep down, Marcus knew it was something more. He'd started feeling weak about 2 months ago, subtle at first. A little more out of breath climbing the stairs to their 3rd-floor apartment. A little more effort required to lift the heavy boxes at work. A slight tremor in his hands when he held them out steady. He'd ignored it, told himself it was just age catching up with him, just the accumulated exhaustion of being a single parent with too many responsibilities and not enough hours in the day. Then came the night that changed everything. It was the first Thursday in November, unseasonably cold, with a wind that cut through jackets and found every gap in weather stripping. Emma had come to the gym bundled in her winter coat, a thick scarf wrapped around her neck, her homework folder clutched against her chest. She'd seemed quieter than usual, more withdrawn, and when Marcus asked if everything was okay, she'd just nodded and said she was tired. The game that night was brutal. Marcus's team was getting destroyed, down 10-3, and every possession felt like he was trying to run through quicksand. Michael was in rare form, hitting contested jumpers, threading passes through impossible gaps, talking trash with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're untouchable. At one point, after scoring on a fast break layup, Michael jogged back down the court and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Come on, Marcus, I thought you were supposed to be good at this." A few of the guys laughed, not maliciously, just the kind of casual ribbing that happens in pickup games. But something about it hit Marcus differently that night. He felt a flash of anger, hot and sharp, and he pushed himself harder, tried to force his body to respond the way it used to. He called for the ball, waved off his teammate who was open in the corner, and drove hard toward the basket where Michael was waiting. Marcus went up for a layup, but his legs didn't give him the lift he expected. Michael's hand came down on the ball, a clean block that sent it flying into the bleachers. Marcus landed awkwardly, his knee twisting slightly, and he felt a sharp pain shoot up his leg. He limped off the court, waving away the concerned looks from the other players, and sat down on the bench near where Emma was doing her homework. She looked up at him with worried eyes. "Dad, are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," he said, rubbing his knee. "Just twisted it a little. Nothing serious." But as he sat there, catching his breath, watching Michael's team continue to dominate the game, Marcus felt something crack inside him. Not physically, but something deeper. It was the realization that he wasn't fine, that nothing was fine, and that pretending otherwise was only making things worse. The next morning, Marcus woke up with his knee swollen to twice its normal size. He could barely put weight on it, and every step sent shooting pains up his leg. He called in sick to work, something he almost never did, and spent the day on the couch with ice packs and ibuprofen, Emma checking on him every hour between her online school assignments. By the afternoon, the pain had spread beyond his knee. His whole body ached in a way that felt wrong, not like the normal soreness from exercise but something deeper, something that made him think of his grandmother in her last years, how she used to say her bones hurt. He tried to stand up to get more ice and his legs nearly gave out beneath him. Emma, who had been in the kitchen making herself a sandwich, rushed over to help him. "Dad, you need to see a doctor," she said, her voice higher than normal, edged with fear that she was trying to hide. Marcus looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw the worry in her eyes. She was 9 years old. She'd already lost her mother. She shouldn't have to worry about losing her father too. And in that moment, sitting on their worn-out couch in their small apartment with medical bills he couldn't afford flashing through his mind, Marcus made a decision he'd been avoiding for weeks. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'll call the doctor on Monday." That Monday appointment led to blood tests. The blood tests led to more appointments, more tests, scans and biopsies and consultations with specialists whose names Marcus could barely pronounce. Through it all, he kept showing up to work, kept helping Emma with her homework, kept maintaining the careful facade that everything was under control. And he kept showing up to the run every Thursday, even though his body was screaming at him to rest. Because those 2 hours on the basketball court were the only time he felt normal, the only time he could pretend that his life wasn't slowly unraveling like a sweater with a pulled thread. The diagnosis came 2 days before Thanksgiving. Marcus sat in the small examination room, the paper sheet crinkling beneath him, staring at the anatomical posters on the wall while Dr. Patricia Okafor explained what the tests had revealed. She was a kind woman, in her 50s, with graying hair and a gentle manner that probably made delivering bad news slightly less awful. "It's a rare autoimmune disorder," she said, her hands folded on top of the folder containing his medical records. "Your immune system is attacking the myelin sheaths around your nerves, causing progressive muscle weakness, fatigue, and pain. It's called chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy, or CIDP." The words washed over Marcus like cold water. He tried to focus on what she was saying, tried to understand, but his mind kept skipping ahead to the questions that really mattered. Can it be cured? Dr. Okafor's expression was carefully neutral. It can be managed. There are treatments, immunotherapy, plasma exchange, intravenous immunoglobulin. But they're expensive and they need to be ongoing. This isn't something that goes away with a few pills. How expensive? She hesitated. Without insurance, the treatments can run between $5,000 and $10,000 per month. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had insurance through his job, but it was a high-deductible plan, the cheapest option the company offered. He'd chosen it because the monthly premiums were lower, because he'd been young and healthy and couldn't imagine needing serious medical care. Now that decision felt like the worst mistake of his life. "And if I don't get treatment?" he asked. Dr. Okafor looked at him with the kind of practiced compassion that comes from having this conversation too many times. "The disease will progress. The muscle weakness will get worse. Eventually, it could affect your ability to walk, to use your hands, to swallow. Quality of life would deteriorate significantly." Marcus sat in silence for a long moment, processing. Finally, he asked, "How long?" "It varies. Some patients stabilize with treatment. Without it, significant deterioration could occur within 6 months to a year." "But Marcus," she leaned forward, "there are programs, financial assistance, payment plans. We'll figure this out." But Marcus knew the reality. He'd seen how the American healthcare system worked. He'd watched his wife's medical bills pile up in the months before she died, even with insurance. He'd spent 2 years paying off those debts, sacrificing everything to clear her name and honor her memory. He couldn't do it again. He wouldn't put Emma through that again. That Thanksgiving was the hardest one Marcus could remember. He and Emma ate turkey sandwiches at their small kitchen table because he couldn't afford a full holiday meal and he'd told her he wasn't feeling well enough for a big dinner anyway. She'd accepted this without complaint, the way she accepted everything, with a maturity that broke his heart. After dinner, they watched a movie together, Emma curled up against his side on the couch, and Marcus tried to memorize the feeling of her warmth, her trust, her belief that he could protect her from anything. The following Thursday, Marcus showed up at the gym determined to play like nothing was wrong. Emma had a school project to finish, so she'd stayed home with their neighbor Mrs. Chen watching her. Marcus was grateful for that. He didn't want Emma to see him struggle, didn't want her to worry more than she already was. The games that night were competitive. Marcus's body was screaming at him, every movement sending signals that he was pushing too hard, doing too much damage. But he played through it, driven by a stubborn refusal to let the disease win. Not yet, not tonight. His team lost the first game badly. They lost the second game too. And in the third game, playing against Michael's team, Marcus found himself guarding the CEO one-on-one. Michael had the ball, dribbling casually at the top of the key, that confident smile on his face. "You've been off your game lately, Marcus," he said. "Everything okay?" Marcus didn't answer, just stayed in his defensive stance, ignoring the burning pain in his legs. Michael made his move, a quick crossover followed by a step-back jumper. Marcus lunged to contest the shot, his hand reaching up, and for a moment he felt like his old self, quick and reactive and alive. But his legs betrayed him. His knee buckled, the same one he'd twisted the week before, and he fell hard onto the court, his palms smacking against the hardwood as he tried to break his fall. The ball swished through the net. Game point. Michael's team had won again. Marcus lay on the floor for a moment, breathing hard, feeling the eyes of everyone in the gym on him. Strong hands grabbed his arms, helping him up. It was Raphael and James, their faces etched with concern. "Man, you need to sit this one out," Raphael said. "You're hurting yourself." Marcus nodded, too exhausted to argue. He limped over to the bleachers and sat down, his head in his hands, trying to catch his breath. The other guys continued playing, but Marcus could feel their glances, their worry. And he could feel something else too, a presence beside him on the bench. He looked up to find Michael standing there, his face unreadable. "That looked bad," Michael said. "You sure you're okay?" "I'm fine," Marcus said automatically. Michael sat down next to him, ignoring the game continuing behind them. "You're not fine. I've been watching you for weeks. You've been getting worse. Slower, weaker. Something's going on." Marcus felt a flash of anger. "What's it to you?" "I'm just concerned," Michael said, and for once, the confidence in his voice seemed to falter slightly. "Look, I know we're not exactly friends. I know you probably think I'm an arrogant asshole who shows up here to stroke his ego and feel superior to regular people." Marcus said nothing, because it was basically true. Michael continued. "But whatever you think of me, I'm not blind. Something's wrong, and it's getting worse. And you've got a kid who needs you." He paused. "I lost my father when I was 12. He was stubborn, wouldn't go to the doctor even when he knew something was wrong. By the time he finally got checked out, the cancer had spread too far. I don't want to see that happen to someone else." Marcus looked at Michael, really looked at him, and for the first time saw past the expensive clothes and the arrogant swagger. There was something genuine in his eyes, something raw and painful that success and money hadn't been able to erase. "I'm sick," Marcus said quietly. It was the first time he'd said it out loud to anyone besides Emma and Dr. Okafor. "Some autoimmune thing. My immune system is attacking my nerves. They can treat it, but the treatment costs more than I make in 3 months." Michael was silent for a long moment. Then he asked, "What are you going to do?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "What can I do? I keep working as long as I can. I save every penny. And I hope that it's enough to take care of Emma when I can't anymore." "That's your plan? Hope? You got a better one?" Marcus snapped. "Not all of us can just write a check and make our problems disappear." Michael flinched at that, and Marcus immediately felt a stab of guilt. It wasn't Michael's fault he was sick. It wasn't Michael's fault the healthcare system was broken. It wasn't Michael's fault that some people were born lucky and others weren't. "I'm sorry," Marcus said. "That wasn't fair." Michael waved it off. "No, you're right. I don't know what it's like to worry about money for medical care. I've never had to." He stood up, looked down at Marcus with an expression that was hard to read. "But maybe I can help. Let me make some calls, talk to some people I know. There might be programs, foundations, something." Marcus wanted to refuse, wanted to tell Michael he didn't need charity from some rich CEO with a savior complex. But looking at Michael's face, he didn't see pity or condescension. He saw something else. Genuine concern. Maybe even respect. "Okay," Marcus said finally. "Thank you." Michael nodded and walked back to the court, where the next game was forming. Marcus sat on the bleachers watching, too exhausted to play anymore, and tried to ignore the voice in his head that whispered he was running out of time. The days following that conversation felt different to Marcus, though he couldn't quite articulate how. Michael didn't bring up the illness again during the next Thursday game, didn't pull him aside for another heart-to-heart, didn't make any grand gestures or promises. In fact, on the surface, everything seemed to continue exactly as it had been. Michael still won most of the games. Marcus still struggled to keep up, his body betraying him more with each passing week. The other guys still played with the same competitive intensity they always had. But there were small changes, subtle enough that Marcus wondered if he was imagining them. Michael seemed to guard him less aggressively, giving him just a bit more space to operate. When Marcus stumbled or moved slower than usual, Michael didn't capitalize on it the way he once would have. And during water breaks, Marcus would sometimes catch Michael watching him with an expression that wasn't quite pity but something closer to calculation, as though he was working through a complex problem in his mind. December arrived with an early snowstorm that blanketed Riverside in 8 inches of powder and turned the morning commute into a nightmare of skidding cars and delayed buses. Marcus had to leave for work an hour earlier than usual, which meant waking Emma up in the dark and rushing through their morning routine. She was quieter than normal as she ate her breakfast, picking at her oatmeal and staring out the window at the snow-covered street. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Marcus asked, leaning against the counter with his coffee, trying to hide how much effort it took just to stand upright these days. Emma looked up at him with those serious eyes that sometimes made her seem much older than 9. "Are we going to have Christmas this year?" The question hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach. "Of course we are. Why would you ask that?" She shrugged, a gesture she'd picked up recently that drove him crazy because it made her seem distant, unreachable. "I heard you on the phone last week. You were talking to someone about money. About how there wasn't enough." Marcus set down his coffee cup and moved to sit across from her at their small kitchen table. Every movement sent small electric shocks of pain through his legs, but he ignored them. "Emma, honey, you don't need to worry about money. That's my job to worry about, not yours." "But I do worry," she said, and her voice cracked slightly. "I worry about you. You're always tired now. You walk funny sometimes. And I see how you look at the bills on the counter when you think I'm not watching." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He'd worked so hard to shield her from his fears, his struggles, his diagnosis. He thought he was doing a good job of maintaining normalcy, of being the strong father she needed. But children see everything, notice every crack in the facade, every moment of weakness that adults think they're hiding. He reached across the table and took her small hand in his. "I'm dealing with some health stuff right now." "That's true. But I'm getting help, and I'm going to be okay. And we're absolutely going to have Christmas. Maybe not a huge Christmas with a million presents, but we'll have our traditions. We'll watch all our favorite movies, we'll make cookies, and we'll have gifts under the tree. I promise." Emma nodded slowly, but Marcus could see she wasn't entirely convinced. She'd learned young that promises from adults don't always mean security, that people you love can disappear without warning, that the world doesn't care about fairness or justice. Her mother's death had taught her that lesson far too early. "Can I ask you something else?" Emma said. "Anything. If something happens to you, where would I go?" The question sucked the air from the room. Marcus had thought about this constantly since the diagnosis, had lost sleep over it, had filled out emergency contact forms at Emma's school with trembling hands because he didn't have a good answer. His parents were dead. Lauren's parents were elderly and lived in Florida in a retirement community that didn't allow children. He had a sister in California who he barely spoke to anymore, a relationship that had fractured years ago over something so petty he could barely remember what started it. "Nothing is going to happen to me," he said firmly. "But if it did, which it won't, you'd be taken care of. There are people who love you, people who would step up." "Like who?" Marcus scrambled for names. "Like Mrs. Chen next door. Like your teacher Mrs. Rodriguez. Like Uncle James from basketball." James wasn't actually Emma's uncle, just one of the guys from the run who had been particularly kind to her over the years, always high-fiving her when he arrived at the gym, asking about school and genuinely listening to her answers. But Marcus knew that basketball friends and friendly neighbors weren't the same as family, weren't the kind of support system that could take in a child long-term. Emma seemed to sense this too. She looked down at her oatmeal and said quietly, "Okay." Marcus wanted to say more, wanted to promise her absolute security and safety, wanted to guarantee that her world wouldn't fall apart again. But he'd learned that some promises were worse than silence because breaking them caused more damage than never making them in the first place. They finished breakfast in quiet, and Marcus drove Emma to school in his aging Honda Civic, the check engine light glowing accusingly from the dashboard. As he watched her walk into the building, her backpack almost as big as she was, he felt a wave of despair so intense it nearly brought him to his knees. How was he supposed to keep her safe? How was he supposed to provide for her when his own body was shutting down? How was he supposed to be both father and mother when he could barely be himself anymore? Work that day was brutal. The cold weather had caused problems with several shipments, frozen pipes at one warehouse, delayed trucks struggling on icy highways, angry customers demanding explanations and refunds. Marcus spent 8 hours on the phone and computer, trying to solve problems while his body screamed for rest. By the time his shift ended, he could barely grip the steering wheel of his car. His hands shook uncontrollably, and the tremors had spread to his arms. He sat in the parking lot for 15 minutes, waiting for the shaking to subside enough that he felt safe to drive. The heater in his car barely worked, and his breath created small clouds in the frigid air. He thought about Dr. Okafor's words, about how the disease would progress, about how eventually he wouldn't be able to work at all. He thought about the bills stacking up on his counter, the medical expenses that his insurance covered only partially, the co-pays and deductibles that seemed designed to bankrupt anyone who had the misfortune of getting sick in America. He thought about Emma's question. Where would she go? When he finally made it home, Emma was already there, let in by Mrs. Chen who had a spare key for emergencies. She was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, and the sight of her bent over her math worksheet, pencil in hand, tongue poking out slightly in concentration the way it always did when she was working hard, made Marcus's chest ache with love and fear in equal measure. "How was your day?" he asked, setting down his work bag and immediately collapsing onto the couch. "Good. We started a new unit in science about the water cycle. And I got an A on my spelling test. That's my girl. I'm so proud of you." Emma looked over at him, and her expression shifted from pride to concern. "Dad, you look really pale. Are you okay?" "Just tired from work. It was a long day." She got up from the table and came over to the couch, placing her small hand on his forehead the way he always did when checking if she had a fever. "You're cold," she said. "You should get under a blanket." Marcus smiled despite everything. "When did you become the parent?" "Someone has to take care of you," she said, and there was something in her voice, a seriousness that no 9-year-old should have to carry. They spent the evening in their usual routine. Marcus helped Emma with her homework, though he had to stop several times to rest his hands when the tremors got too bad. They made dinner together, boxed macaroni and cheese with frozen vegetables mixed in, nothing fancy but filling and warm. They watched an episode of a nature documentary that Emma loved, something about emperor penguins in Antarctica, and Marcus found himself thinking about those father penguins who huddled together through brutal winters, protecting their eggs while the mothers hunted at sea, sacrificing everything to keep their offspring alive. After Emma went to bed, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills. The numbers didn't lie. His bank account had $417. His next paycheck was in 2 days, and it would be $1,500 after taxes. Rent was due on the 1st, $1,200. That left $717 for everything else. Groceries, utilities, gas, Emma's after-school program, phone bill, car insurance, his prescriptions that insurance only partially covered. The math didn't work. It never worked. He was always playing a shell game with expenses, deciding which crisis to address and which to postpone. And that wasn't even accounting for the medical treatments Dr. Okafor wanted him to start. The immunotherapy sessions that cost thousands of dollars each. The specialized medications that his insurance considered experimental and refused to cover. The physical therapy that might slow his deterioration but wasn't classified as medically necessary according to some algorithm in an insurance company computer. Marcus put his head in his hands and allowed himself exactly 5 minutes to feel sorry for himself, to rage against the unfairness of it all, to wonder what he'd done to deserve this. Then he took a deep breath, put the bills back in their folder, and went to bed. Because tomorrow would come whether he was ready or not, and Emma needed him to keep fighting. Thursday arrived again, as it always did, with its promise of 2 hours where Marcus could pretend to be someone other than a sick man drowning in debt. Emma wanted to come to the gym, said she'd finished all her homework early, but Marcus told her he wasn't feeling well enough to play that night and she should stay home. It was a lie. He was feeling terrible, worse than usual, but he needed to go anyway. Needed that time away from being a father, away from being responsible, away from the constant weight of his circumstances. The gym was warm when he arrived, a welcome contrast to the bitter cold outside. The usual group was there, guys stretching, shooting around, catching up on the week's events. Michael was already on the court, going through an elaborate warm-up routine that probably cost him $50 a session with his personal trainer to learn. Marcus changed into his basketball shoes, old Nikes that had seen better days, the soles wearing thin and the cushioning nearly gone. Just putting them on required more effort than it should have, his hands fumbling with the laces, his fingers not quite cooperating the way they once did. When he stepped onto the court, Raphael came over and clapped him on the shoulder. "Good to see you, man. We missed you being at full strength. You feeling any better?" "Getting there," Marcus lied. The first game started, and Marcus tried to lose himself in the rhythm of basketball. But his body wouldn't cooperate. Every cut felt sluggish. Every jump was a few inches shorter than it should have been. His shot, once reliable, clanged off the rim again and again. And Michael was everywhere, playing with the kind of effortless dominance that suggested he could dial it up or down at will. Halfway through the game, with Michael's team winning easily, Marcus found himself isolated at the top of the key with Michael guarding him. The other players had cleared out, giving them space for a one-on-one matchup. Marcus could feel everyone watching, waiting to see what would happen. He tried to make a move, a simple crossover that he'd done 10,000 times in his life. But his body misfired. His feet got tangled, his balance shifted wrong, and he stumbled forward. Michael could have stolen the ball easily, could have blown past him for an uncontested layup. Instead, he reached out and steadied Marcus with a hand on his shoulder, keeping him from falling. "You good?" Michael asked quietly. Marcus nodded, too embarrassed to speak. He passed the ball to a teammate and jogged back on defense, feeling the eyes of everyone in the gym boring into his back. They lost that game. They lost the next one too. And in the third game, Marcus's legs finally gave out completely. He was backpedaling on defense when his knees simply buckled, and he went down hard on the court. Not dramatically, not with a torn ligament or a twisted ankle that would have made sense to the other players. Just a quiet collapse, his muscles refusing to hold his weight anymore. Raphael and James rushed over immediately, helping him up, asking if he needed a doctor. Marcus waved them off, said he was fine, just slipped on a wet spot or something. But everyone could see it wasn't true. Everyone knew something was seriously wrong. Michael called for a water break, and the guys dispersed to the sidelines. Marcus sat on the bench, his head down, fighting back tears of frustration and shame. He felt someone sit down next to him and knew without looking that it was Michael. "This has to stop," Michael said quietly. "I'm fine." "Marcus, you just collapsed in the middle of a game. You're not fine. You're getting worse, and you're putting yourself in danger. What do you want me to do?" Marcus snapped, his voice harsh. "Stop living? Stop doing the things that make me feel human? This gym, these games, this is all I have that isn't about being sick or being broke or being scared. So forgive me if I'm not ready to give it up yet." Michael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I made those calls I mentioned. Talked to some people I know in healthcare, some foundation directors, some philanthropists who fund medical research and patient assistance programs." Marcus looked up at him, hope and suspicion warring in his chest. "There's a clinical trial," Michael continued. "It's being run out of a research hospital about 2 hours from here. They're testing a new immunotherapy protocol for CIDP and similar autoimmune disorders. The treatment is completely free for trial participants. All costs covered, travel reimbursement included, everything. What's the catch?" "No catch. You'd have to agree to regular monitoring, extensive documentation, follow-up appointments. But you'd be getting cutting-edge treatment that normally costs tens of thousands of dollars, and you wouldn't pay a cent." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he hadn't realized was there. "How do I get in?" "I already got you in," Michael said. "I called in a favor with the lead researcher. He's an old friend from college. He agreed to review your case and he thinks you'd be a good candidate. You have an appointment next Tuesday to go over the details and start screening." Marcus stared at Michael, trying to process what he was hearing. "Why would you do this for me?" Michael looked uncomfortable, like he wasn't used to explaining his motivations to anyone. "I told you about my father. How he died because he was too stubborn to get help when he needed it. I watched my mother fall apart after he was gone. I was too young to do anything about it, too powerless to change the outcome. But I'm not powerless anymore. I have resources, connections, influence. And if I can use those things to keep a little girl from losing her father the way I lost mine, then that's what I'm going to do." Marcus felt tears burning in his eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just promise me you'll go to the appointment. Promise me you'll take the help." "I promise," Marcus said, and for the first time in months, he felt something that wasn't fear or despair. He felt hope. The following Tuesday, Marcus took a personal day from work and drove 2 hours north to the research hospital. It was a massive complex, all glass and steel and cutting-edge architecture, the kind of place that made clear this was where serious medicine happened. He met with Dr. James Chen, the lead researcher, a man in his early 40s with wire-rimmed glasses and an intensity that suggested he cared more about solving medical puzzles than about social niceties. Dr. Chen reviewed Marcus's medical history, asked hundreds of questions about his symptoms and their progression, and ran a battery of tests that took most of the day. By the time they finished, Marcus was exhausted, but Dr. Chen seemed energized, excited even. "You're a good fit for the trial," he said, pulling up scans and charts on his computer screen. "Your disease progression is consistent with what we're targeting. The timing is right. We're starting a new cohort next month, and we have 1 spot left. If you want it, it's yours. What does the treatment involve?" Dr. Chen launched into an explanation that was both fascinating and completely over Marcus's head, something about monoclonal antibodies and T-cell regulation and inflammatory cascades. The practical upshot was that Marcus would come in once every 2 weeks for an infusion that would take about 4 hours. The treatment was designed to reset his immune system, to stop it from attacking his own nerves, to give his body a chance to heal. What are the side effects? Fatigue, nausea, possible flu-like symptoms for a day or 2 after each infusion. Some patients experience headaches. But we monitor closely, and serious adverse reactions are rare. The bigger question is whether it will work. We've seen promising results in our preliminary trials. About 60% of patients show significant improvement. 20% stabilize, meaning their disease stops progressing even if they don't get dramatically better. And 20% don't respond. But even for non-responders, we usually don't see worsening during treatment. Marcus did the math in his head. An 80% chance of not getting worse, a 60% chance of actually improving. Those were odds he could work with. When can I start? Dr. Chen smiled. January 8th. And Marcus, I want you to understand something. This trial exists because of people like Michael Rivera. His company donated $5 million to fund this research. Without that contribution, we wouldn't have the resources to help patients like you. He's made a real difference in the world, even if most people will never know it. Marcus nodded, feeling a complicated mix of gratitude and something else he couldn't quite name. He'd spent months thinking of Michael as an arrogant rich guy who played basketball to feed his ego. It had never occurred to him that Michael might be carrying his own pain, his own history, his own reasons for showing up week after week to compete with men who had nothing in common with him except a love of the game. He drove home that evening with a sense of cautious optimism that felt foreign and fragile. When he got back to Riverside, he picked Emma up from Mrs. Chen's apartment and took her out for pizza, a small celebration they couldn't really afford but needed anyway. Why are we celebrating? Emma asked, her mouth full of pepperoni. Because sometimes good things happen, Marcus said. And when they do, we should acknowledge them. Emma grinned at him, and for a moment she looked exactly like her mother, the same smile that lit up a room, the same joy that seemed to come from somewhere deep and unshakable. Are you going to get better? I'm going to try, Marcus said. I'm going to try really hard. That Thursday at the gym, Marcus arrived feeling lighter than he had in months. The treatment wouldn't start for another 3 weeks, and his symptoms were still there, still grinding him down day by day. But knowing that help was coming, that there was a path forward, made everything feel more bearable. Michael was already on the court when Marcus walked in, and their eyes met across the gym. Marcus nodded, a small gesture of acknowledgement and thanks. Michael nodded back, then went back to his warm-up routine as though nothing had changed. The games that night followed the same pattern they'd been following for weeks. Marcus struggled. His team lost. Michael's team won. But somehow it felt different. Marcus found himself watching Michael more carefully, noticing things he'd missed before. The way Michael always made sure the younger, less skilled players got touches and opportunities. The way he'd call out encouragement to teammates, genuine praise rather than empty platitudes. The way he stayed after games helping to clean up, collecting basketballs and pushing equipment back into storage. During a water break, Raphael pulled Marcus aside. Man, I've been meaning to ask. Are you and Rivera friends now or something? I saw you two talking last week, seemed pretty intense. Marcus considered the question. Were they friends? He wasn't sure what they were. He's helping me out with some stuff. Medical stuff. Raphael's eyebrows shot up. The CEO is helping you with medical stuff? Long story. But yeah. He connected me with a clinical trial for my condition. Damn. That's solid of him. Maybe he's not as bad as we thought. Marcus laughed. Maybe not. As December wore on, Marcus found himself watching Michael's game more analytically, trying to understand something he'd missed before. And slowly, over multiple Thursdays, a pattern emerged that made him catch his breath. Michael wasn't playing at full intensity anymore. The realization came gradually, like trying to see a constellation in the night sky that only becomes visible once you know where to look. Michael was still winning most games, still dominating in ways that seemed effortless. But there were moments, small moments that most people wouldn't notice, where Michael made choices that didn't quite make sense from a purely competitive standpoint. A pass to a teammate when Michael had an open shot. A slight hesitation on defense that gave Marcus an extra second to make a play. A missed rotation that allowed Marcus's team to score when Michael could have easily prevented it. The first time Marcus noticed it, he thought he was imagining things. The second time, he thought maybe Michael was tired or distracted. But by the third and fourth and fifth time, a pattern became undeniable. Michael was letting him score. Not obviously, not in a way that would humiliate Marcus or make it clear that he was being given charity on the basketball court. But subtly, strategically, creating just enough space for Marcus to have moments of success, to feel capable, to maintain his dignity. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow during a game 2 weeks before Christmas. He'd driven past Michael for a layup, something that should have been impossible given how much his body had deteriorated. But Michael had been just slightly out of position, had committed to a defensive move just a fraction of a second too late, had given Marcus the lane. And as Marcus jogged back on defense, he caught Michael's eye and saw something there that confirmed his suspicion. A flicker of acknowledgement, a subtle nod, an unspoken message that said, "I see you, I know what you're going through, and I'm not going to take away the one place where you still feel strong." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He turned away quickly, blinking back tears, overwhelmed by the gesture. Because Michael wasn't just being generous or charitable. He was being kind in a way that preserved Marcus's pride, that allowed him to still feel like a competitor rather than a patient, that gave him those precious moments of normalcy that were becoming increasingly rare in his life. For the rest of the game, Marcus played harder than he had in weeks, fueled not by his failing body but by something else entirely. Gratitude, respect, a fierce determination to honor Michael's gift by not wasting it. His team still lost, but Marcus scored 8 points, more than he'd scored in the previous month combined. And when the game ended, when he was bent over catching his breath and feeling the familiar burning pain in his legs and hands, Michael walked over and held out his fist for a bump. "Good game," Michael said simply. "Thanks," Marcus replied, and they both knew he wasn't just thanking him for the compliment. That night, after the games ended and everyone was packing up to leave, Marcus lingered in the gym. Michael was the last one there besides him, methodically lacing up his street shoes. They were alone for the first time since that conversation on the bench weeks ago. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. Michael looked up. "Sure." "Why basketball? Out of all the ways you could spend your Thursday evenings, all the things a guy like you could be doing, why do you come here?" Michael was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Finally, he said, "When I built my company, when I started having success, I found that people treated me differently. Friends from college suddenly needed favors. Family members came out of the woodwork looking for investments. Business acquaintances wanted partnerships or funding or access to my network. Everyone wanted something from me. Everyone had an angle." He tied his shoe and sat back, looking up at the gym's fluorescent lights. "But here, on this court, none of that matters. Nobody cares what my net worth is or what my company does. They just care whether I can play. Whether I'm going to be a good teammate or a ball hog. Whether I'm going to play hard or mail it in. It's the only place in my life where I'm judged entirely on what I do right now, in this moment, rather than what I have or who I know." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding. "And yet you're using what you have, who you know, to help me. Doesn't that contradict what you just said?" Michael smiled slightly. "Maybe. Or maybe it means that basketball taught me something. That real competition isn't about crushing the other guy. It's about pushing each other to be better. It's about recognizing that we're all out here struggling with something, and sometimes the strongest thing you can do is help someone else stand up." They left the gym together, walking out into the cold December night. Snow was falling lightly, covering everything in a blanket of white that made the world seem cleaner, newer, full of possibility. Marcus's car was parked next to Michael's Mercedes, a study in contrasts that would have felt heavy with class resentment a few months ago. Now it just felt like two different tools that both got their owners where they needed to go. "Marcus," Michael said as they reached their vehicles. "I want you to know something. What I'm doing, helping you with the trial, it's not charity. It's not some rich guy trying to feel good about himself. It's me trying to change an outcome that I couldn't change when I was 12 years old. It's me trying to make sure Emma doesn't go through what I went through. And honestly, it's selfish because helping you helps me feel like maybe my father's death wasn't completely meaningless if I can learn from it and use that lesson to help someone else." Marcus felt his eyes burning again. "You're a good man, Michael. I misjudged you." "We all misjudge each other," Michael said. "That's part of being human. The important thing is whether we're willing to revise our judgments when we learn new information." They shook hands, a firm grip that meant more than words could express, and then got into their respective cars. As Marcus drove home through the snowy streets, he thought about the strange turn his life had taken. 6 months ago, he'd been healthy and struggling financially but managing. 3 months ago, he'd received a diagnosis that felt like a death sentence. And now, through a series of events he never could have predicted, he'd found hope in the most unlikely place, from a man he'd dismissed as arrogant and out of touch. Christmas came, and true to his word, Marcus made sure Emma had her traditions. They watched all their favorite holiday movies, they baked cookies that turned out slightly burned but tasted good anyway, and on Christmas morning there were presents under their small tree. Nothing extravagant, nothing expensive, but thoughtful gifts that showed Emma she was loved and valued. A new set of colored pencils because she loved to draw. A science kit because she was curious about how the world worked. A warm winter coat because her old one was getting too small and Marcus had found one on clearance that was perfect. Emma gave him a present too, something she'd made herself in art class at school. It was a framed drawing of the two of them, stick figures holding hands, with the words "World's Best Dad" written in her careful handwriting across the top. Marcus hung it in the kitchen where he could see it every morning, a reminder of why he was fighting so hard to stay alive. On January 8th, Marcus drove back to the research hospital for his first treatment. Dr. Chen explained the process again, made sure Marcus understood the potential risks and benefits, and had him sign more consent forms than seemed necessary. Then a nurse whose name tag read Patricia led him to a private room with a comfortable recliner chair, medical equipment, and a window that looked out over a snow-covered courtyard. The infusion took 4 hours. Patricia started in 4, connected bags of clear liquid to various pumps and monitors, and then left him alone with instructions to call if he felt dizzy or nauseous or noticed anything unusual. Marcus spent the time reading a book he'd brought, dozing occasionally, and thinking about Emma who was spending the day with Mrs. Chen. He didn't feel anything dramatic during the treatment. No sudden surge of energy, no mystical healing sensation, nothing that would make a good story. Just 4 hours in a chair, liquid dripping into his veins, the quiet beep of medical equipment in the background. When it was over, Patricia disconnected everything, gave him some pamphlets about what to expect over the next few days, and sent him home with instructions to rest. The side effects hit him that evening. Fatigue so profound he could barely make it from the couch to the bathroom. A low-grade fever that made him shiver under multiple blankets. A headache that felt like someone was driving nails into his skull. Emma made him soup from a can, brought him water, and sat beside him watching television with the volume low so it wouldn't make his headache worse. "Is the medicine supposed to make you feel worse?" she asked. "Sometimes medicine has to fight the bad stuff in your body," Marcus explained. "And that fighting can make you feel sick for a little while. But it means it's working. Are you going to be okay?" He pulled her close, despite how terrible he felt, because she needed the reassurance more than he needed to preserve his energy. "I'm going to be okay." By the 3rd day after the infusion, the side effects had faded and Marcus felt well enough to go back to work. But something was different. The tremors in his hands were slightly less pronounced. The weakness in his legs was still there but didn't seem to be getting worse. It was too early to tell if the treatment was actually working, if his body was responding to the therapy or if he was experiencing a placebo effect or just having a good week. But for the first time in months, the trajectory of his illness didn't feel like a straight line down. That Thursday, Marcus showed up at the gym feeling cautiously optimistic. Michael was there, of course, going through his usual warm-up routine. They nodded to each other in acknowledgement but didn't speak. There was an understanding between them now, a shared knowledge that didn't require constant verbal affirmation. The games that night were competitive. Marcus's team won the first game, and he contributed meaningfully, hitting a couple of jump shots and playing solid defense. They lost the second game, but it was close, coming down to the final possession. And in the third game, something remarkable happened. Marcus found himself isolated against Michael at the top of the key, the same matchup that had defined their relationship for months. The score was tied at 14, next basket wins. Everyone on the court seemed to recognize the significance of the moment, the way this one play had become symbolic of something larger than basketball. Marcus took a deep breath and made his move. A crossover dribble, sharp and quick, better than anything he'd managed in months. Michael stayed with him but gave him just enough space to operate. Marcus drove hard to the basket, his legs responding the way they used to, powerful and coordinated. He elevated for a layup, expecting Michael to contest it, to block it the way he'd blocked so many of Marcus's attempts over the past months. But Michael didn't jump. He stayed grounded, his arms at his sides, and watched as Marcus's layup kissed off the glass and dropped through the net. Game over. Marcus's team had won. The gym erupted in celebration, guys high-fiving and chest-bumping and talking trash. But Marcus stood still, looking at Michael, who was looking back at him with an expression that was impossible to read. Then Michael smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, and held out his fist. Marcus bumped it, and in that moment, he understood something fundamental. Michael hadn't just let him win. He'd given Marcus the opportunity to prove to himself that he could still compete, that the treatment might be working, that he wasn't defeated yet. It was a gift disguised as a game, generosity wrapped in competition, kindness delivered in a way that preserved dignity. After everyone had left that night, after the gym was empty and quiet, Marcus sat alone on the bleachers thinking about the strange path that had led him here. 6 months ago, he'd been healthy and complacent. 3 months ago, he'd been diagnosed and despairing. And now, he was sick but fighting, struggling but hopeful, losing but somehow winning in ways that had nothing to do with scores or statistics. He thought about Michael, about how easy it would be to write him off as just another rich guy trying to buy redemption or ease his conscience. But the truth was more complicated than that. Michael was a man carrying his own grief, his own guilt, his own need to make meaning out of loss. He'd found a way to do that through basketball, through philanthropy, through small acts of kindness that didn't make headlines but changed lives anyway. Marcus pulled out his phone and sent a text message. "Thank you for everything." A minute later, his phone buzzed with a response. "Same time next Thursday?" Marcus smiled and typed back, "I'll be there." And he was. Thursday after Thursday, treatment after treatment, game after game, Marcus kept showing up. Some weeks he felt better, strong enough to almost forget he was sick. Other weeks the disease reminded him it was still there, still fighting him, still trying to take away his strength and mobility and independence. But he kept showing up anyway, kept fighting, kept pushing forward. Michael was there too, every Thursday without fail, continuing the silent arrangement they'd never openly acknowledged. He'd win most games but always leave room for Marcus to contribute, to matter, to feel capable. And Marcus accepted this gift without resentment, understanding that sometimes pride needs to be sacrificed for something more important. Sometimes losing means winning, and sometimes letting someone help you is the bravest thing you can do. By February, Marcus's doctors confirmed what he'd begun to suspect. The treatment was working. His symptoms had stabilized and in some cases were improving. The tremors were less frequent. The weakness was less pronounced. He wasn't cured, wasn't anywhere close to cured, but he was stable. He was fighting back. He was still here. And Emma noticed. She noticed that her father smiled more, worried less, seemed lighter somehow despite everything they were going through. Spring arrived in Riverside with an explosion of color that seemed almost defiant after the long gray winter. Cherry blossoms lined the streets near Emma's school, their pink petals drifting through the air like confetti. The days grew longer, warmer, and Marcus found himself able to walk the 3 blocks to the corner store without needing to rest halfway. Small victories, incremental improvements, but they accumulated into something that felt like progress. Emma turned 10 in March, and for the first time since his diagnosis, Marcus felt confident enough to throw her a proper birthday party. Nothing elaborate, just 6 of her classmates in their small apartment, cheap decorations from the dollar store, a homemade cake that leaned slightly to one side but tasted decent. The kids played games, Emma opened presents, and Marcus watched from the kitchen doorway feeling a gratitude so intense it bordered on religious. One of the mothers who came to pick up her daughter lingered after the other parents had left. Her name was Sarah Martinez, and Marcus recognized her from school pickup although they'd never spoken more than quick hellos. She was a few years younger than him, worked as a dental hygienist, and had a warm smile that put people at ease. "Emma talks about you all the time at school," Sarah said as they stood in the hallway outside his apartment. "She's really proud of you." Marcus felt his face flush. "I'm just trying to be a decent father." "You're doing more than decent. Raising a kid alone is hard. Raising a kid alone while dealing with health issues is incredibly hard. Emma seems happy, well-adjusted, loved. That's everything." They talked for a few more minutes, exchanging phone numbers so they could coordinate playdates. As Sarah walked away down the hall, Marcus felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't felt since Lauren died. Not attraction exactly, or at least not only that. More like the possibility of connection, the awareness that maybe his life didn't have to be defined entirely by illness and struggle and survival. Thursday basketball continued to be the anchor of his week. By April, Marcus was playing better than he had in nearly a year. The treatments were clearly working, his body responding to the immunotherapy in ways that Dr. Chen said exceeded their expectations. The tremors had become rare enough that he sometimes went whole days without experiencing them. The weakness in his legs had improved to the point where he could jog short distances without his muscles screaming in protest. Michael noticed the improvement too, though he didn't comment on it directly. But Marcus could tell by the way Michael played against him now, with slightly more intensity, giving him a bit less space, challenging him more aggressively. It was a form of respect, an acknowledgement that Marcus was becoming stronger, that he didn't need quite as much accommodation as before. One Thursday in late April, after the games had ended and most of the guys had left, Michael approached Marcus near the bleachers. "You got a minute?" They walked outside together into the mild spring evening. The sun was just starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Michael seemed uncharacteristically hesitant, like he was working up the courage to say something difficult. "I need to tell you something," Michael finally said. "About the games. About how I've been playing against you." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He'd known for months that Michael was going easy on him, but they'd never acknowledged it out loud. Part of him wanted to stop Michael from saying anything, to preserve the comfortable fiction they'd been maintaining. But another part knew that honesty, even uncomfortable honesty, was what real friendship required. "I know," Marcus said quietly. "I've known for a while." Michael looked surprised. "You knew?" "I'm not an idiot. I know what my body can and can't do. I know I shouldn't have been scoring on you, shouldn't have been able to keep up with you. You were letting me compete, letting me have those moments where I felt normal again." "I'm sorry," Michael said. "I didn't mean to insult you or make you feel like you needed charity." Marcus shook his head. "That's the thing. It wasn't insulting. It was the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me, precisely because you did it in a way that let me keep my dignity. You gave me something I desperately needed without making me feel weak or pathetic for needing it." They stood in silence for a moment, watching cars drive past on the street, listening to the distant sounds of the city settling into evening. Finally Michael said, "My therapist says I have a savior complex. That I'm trying to rescue people because I couldn't rescue my father. That I should examine my motivations and make sure I'm helping people for the right reasons rather than to make myself feel better." "Are you?" Marcus asked. "Helping people to make yourself feel better?" Michael considered the question seriously. "Probably some of both. I'm not going to pretend I'm some selfless saint. Helping you, getting you into that trial, it does make me feel good. It makes me feel like I'm using my advantages for something meaningful. But that doesn't make the help less real, does it? The fact that I benefit emotionally from helping you doesn't cancel out the fact that you're actually being helped. Marcus thought about this. No, I guess it doesn't. And honestly, I don't care about your motivations. You saved my life. You're giving my daughter her father back. Whether you did it out of pure altruism or because it helps you process your own grief doesn't change the outcome. The thing is, Michael continued, I'm starting to realize that you've helped me too. Coming here every Thursday, competing with you and the other guys, it's kept me grounded in a way that nothing else in my life does. In my work, I'm surrounded by people who tell me what I want to hear, who defer to my judgment even when I'm wrong, who treat every decision I make like it's brilliant. But here, on this court, none of that matters. If I make a bad pass, someone calls me out. If I'm not hustling on defense, I hear about it. You guys treat me like a regular person, and I needed that more than I realized. Marcus smiled. So we're helping each other. I guess we are. They made plans to grab dinner sometime, maybe bring Emma along to meet Michael properly outside the context of the gym. As they parted ways, Marcus felt the relationship between them shift from something transactional into something more substantial. They weren't just the sick guy and the rich guy anymore. They were friends, complicated and imperfect, but genuine. May brought a heat wave that turned the gym into a sauna. The ancient air conditioning system struggled to keep up, and games became battles of endurance as much as skill. Marcus found himself actually enjoying the physical challenge in a way he hadn't been able to for over a year. His body was cooperating again, responding to his commands, executing movements that had seemed impossible just months earlier. Emma finished 4th grade with straight A's, an achievement that filled Marcus with pride that bordered on absurd given that she was only 10. But after everything they'd been through, every normal milestone felt like a miracle. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, pulled him aside during the final parent-teacher conference to tell him what an exceptional child he was raising, how Emma showed empathy and maturity beyond her years, how she was always the first to help struggling classmates or include kids who seemed left out. She's learned those qualities from you, Mrs. Rodriguez said. Children model what they see at home. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Marcus accepted the compliment while thinking about all the ways he'd failed Emma over the past year. The times he'd been too tired to help with homework, too sick to attend school events, too overwhelmed to give her the attention she deserved. But maybe Mrs. Rodriguez was right. Maybe Emma had learned something valuable from watching him struggle and persist, from seeing him fall down and get back up, from understanding that strength isn't about never being weak but about continuing to fight even when you are. That summer, for the first time in years, Marcus felt stable enough financially to take Emma on a vacation. Nothing extravagant, just 3 days at a beach 2 hours away, staying in a budget motel that smelled faintly of mildew but was clean and safe. They built sandcastles, swam in the ocean, ate ice cream for dinner one night because they were on vacation and normal rules didn't apply. On their last evening, as they walked along the shore watching the sunset, Emma said, "This has been the best summer ever." Marcus looked down at her, at this fierce, resilient little person who had endured so much loss and uncertainty with grace that humbled him. Even better than the summer we went to Disney World? That had been before Lauren died, before everything fell apart, when they'd still been a normal family with normal problems. Emma nodded seriously. That was fun, but I was little and I don't remember it that well. This is better because it's just us, and you're happy, and you're not sick all the time anymore. Marcus felt his throat tighten. I'm still sick, sweetheart. I'll probably always have this condition. But you're right that I'm managing it better now. Because of Mr. Rivera, Emma said. It wasn't a question. Yes. He helped a lot. Is he your friend now? Marcus thought about how to answer that. Yeah, I think he is. Good, Emma said. Everyone needs friends. Even dads. They flew a kite they'd bought from a beach shop, a cheap nylon thing that fought them at first but eventually caught the wind and soared. Marcus stood on the sand holding the string, feeling it pull against his hands, and thought about how much his life had changed in a single year. He'd gone from healthy to sick, from secure to terrified, from proud to humbled. And through it all, through every setback and crisis and moment of despair, he'd found something unexpected. Community. Friendship. Grace. August meant preparations for 5th grade, school supply shopping and new clothes because Emma had grown 3 inches over the summer. It also meant Marcus's 1-year anniversary in the clinical trial, a milestone that Dr. Chen celebrated with genuine enthusiasm during their appointment. "Your improvement has been remarkable," Dr. Chen said, pulling up charts and graphs on his computer. "Not just stable but genuinely better. Your nerve conduction studies show significant recovery. Your muscle strength tests are approaching normal ranges. Your inflammatory markers are down by 70%. Marcus, you're one of our best responders. What does that mean long term? It means if we can keep you in this treatment protocol, there's no reason to think you won't continue to improve. You might never be exactly the same as you were before the disease onset, but you could get pretty close. Close enough that most people wouldn't even know you have a chronic condition." Marcus felt tears threatening and didn't bother trying to hide them. "Can I stay in the trial?" "As long as the funding holds and you continue to benefit, absolutely." "And between you and me," Dr. Chen leaned forward conspiratorially, "Michael Rivera just committed another $3 million to expand the trial and extend it for another 5 years. So yeah, I think you can stay in." That Thursday, Marcus arrived at the gym with a lightness in his step that hadn't been there in over a year. Michael was already on the court, and when he saw Marcus, he jogged over with a smile. "Heard you had a good appointment with Dr. Chen." "You heard correctly. Thank you doesn't even begin to cover it." Michael waved this off. "Thank me by playing hard tonight. I'm tired of going easy on you." Marcus laughed. "You're on." And for the first time in over a year, they played at full intensity. No accommodation, no pulling punches, no subtle adjustments to level the playing field. Michael guarded him aggressively, contested every shot, fought for every rebound. And Marcus met the challenge, his body responding with a strength and coordination that felt almost miraculous after so many months of deterioration. They ended up on opposite teams in the final game of the night, score tied at 14, winner take all. The ball found its way to Marcus at the top of the key with Michael guarding him tight. For a moment, they just stood there, facing each other, and Marcus saw in Michael's eyes a question. "Are you ready? Can you do this for real now?" Marcus nodded slightly, an answer to an unasked question. Then he made his move. He crossed the ball over hard, drove left, spun back right, and elevated for a fadeaway jumper. Michael was right there, hand in his face, contesting perfectly. The shot arced through the air and Marcus knew the moment it left his fingers that it was good. The ball dropped through the net with a satisfying swish. Game over. Marcus's team had won. But this time felt different from all the other times. This time, Marcus knew he'd earned it. Michael had played him straight, hadn't given him anything, and Marcus had still delivered. He'd proven to himself and everyone watching that he was back, that the disease hadn't beaten him, that he could still compete with the best player in the gym when it mattered most. Michael walked over with a huge grin and pulled Marcus into a hug, the kind of embrace that transcends sports rivalry and speaks to something deeper. "That's what I'm talking about. That's the Marcus I knew was still in there." The other guys crowded around, congratulating Marcus, and for a moment he felt like he was back in high school, back when his body was young and strong and basketball was just a game rather than a lifeline. But this was better than high school because he'd earned this moment through suffering, through perseverance, through accepting help when he needed it and fighting when he had strength to fight. As fall arrived and Emma started 5th grade, Marcus found his life settling into a new normal that bore little resemblance to the chaos of the previous year. His health continued to improve, slowly but steadily. His financial situation stabilized as his medical expenses decreased and he got a small raise at work. His relationship with Emma deepened as they both healed from the trauma of his diagnosis and her fear of losing another parent. And his friendship with Michael evolved into something neither of them had expected. They started meeting for coffee occasionally, conversations that ranged from basketball to business to philosophy to parenting. Michael opened up about his divorce 3 years earlier, how his ex-wife had grown tired of always coming second to his company, how he'd realized too late that success in business doesn't translate to success in relationships. Marcus talked about Lauren, about the guilt he still carried that he hadn't been able to save her, about how Emma reminded him every day of what he'd lost and what he still had to lose. One October evening, over pizza at a restaurant near the gym, Michael said something that caught Marcus off guard. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond." Marcus set down his slice, suddenly worried. "Okay. The games. The way I was playing against you for all those months. I told you I was helping you keep your dignity, letting you have moments where you felt capable. And that was true. But there was another reason too, one I wasn't entirely honest about." Marcus waited, uncertain where this was going. "I was scared," Michael said quietly. "Scared that if I beat you too badly, if I crushed you the way I could have, you'd stop coming. You'd give up on basketball, maybe give up on fighting the disease. And I needed you to keep coming because watching you fight, watching you show up week after week even when your body was failing, it inspired me in ways I can't fully articulate. My life had become easy, comfortable, insulated from real struggle. And seeing you face actual hardship with courage and grace, it reminded me what strength really looks like." Marcus felt his eyes burning. "So you weren't just helping me. You were helping yourself." "I was. And I know that's selfish, that I should have been honest about my motivations, but I was afraid that if you knew, it would change things between us." Marcus thought about this for a long moment. Then he said, "Michael, here's the truth. I don't care why you helped me. Maybe your motivations were partly selfish. Maybe you have a savior complex like your therapist says. Maybe you were processing your grief about your father. Maybe you just wanted to feel good about yourself. None of that changes the fact that you saved my life. You gave me access to treatment I couldn't afford. You supported me when I was at my lowest. You helped me keep my dignity when everything else was being stripped away. The why doesn't matter as much as the what. But intention matters," Michael insisted. "If I helped you primarily to make myself feel better, doesn't that diminish the value of the help?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "Because the help was still real. Emma still has her father. I still have a chance at a future. Those are objective facts that exist regardless of your motivations. And honestly, I think you're being too hard on yourself. People rarely do things for purely altruistic reasons. We're all a mix of selfishness and generosity, ego and empathy. The fact that helping me also helped you doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a human being." Michael nodded slowly, visibly relieved. "Thank you for saying that. Thank you for caring enough to examine your motivations in the first place. A lot of people wouldn't bother." They finished their pizza and talked about lighter topics, but something had shifted between them. The relationship had moved beyond gratitude and obligation into genuine friendship, built on honesty and mutual respect. November brought Emma's school play, a production of Alice in Wonderland where she played the Cheshire Cat. Marcus sat in the packed auditorium watching her deliver her lines with confidence and enthusiasm, and he thought about how close he'd come to missing this. If the disease had progressed unchecked, if Michael hadn't connected him with the trial, he might not have been here. He might not have seen his daughter shine on stage, might not have been able to applaud when she took her bow, might not have been waiting backstage afterward with flowers and pride bursting from his chest. Sarah Martinez was there too, her daughter having played Alice. They ended up sitting together, and afterward, as the kids ran around the playground outside the school still buzzing with performance adrenaline, Sarah asked Marcus if he'd like to get coffee sometime. "Just coffee?" Marcus asked, his heart suddenly beating faster. Sarah smiled. "To start. If it goes well, maybe dinner. If that goes well, maybe more. No pressure, no expectations. Just two single parents trying to figure out if they enjoy each other's company." Marcus said yes, and they went to coffee the following Saturday while Emma was at a friend's house. They talked for 3 hours, covering everything from their kids to their jobs to their dreams for the future. Sarah had been divorced for 2 years, her ex-husband having moved to another state for work and barely maintaining contact with their daughter. She was funny and smart and kind, and Marcus found himself genuinely interested in what she had to say rather than just going through the motions of dating. When he told Emma about it later, she surprised him by being excited rather than protective or worried about another woman entering their lives. "Dad, you should definitely go out with her again. She seems nice, and you've been alone for a really long time." "I haven't been alone. I've had you." Emma rolled her eyes with the exasperation only a 10-year-old can muster. "You know what I mean. You should have someone besides me. Someone who makes you happy in grown-up ways." Marcus laughed at her phrasing but understood what she meant. And slowly, carefully, he opened his life to the possibility of romance again. He and Sarah went on more dates, gradually introducing a physical dimension to their relationship while being careful not to move too fast or involve the kids too deeply until they were sure this was serious. Thursday basketball continued through the winter, and Marcus found himself playing better than he had since college. His body had recovered to the point where the disease was barely noticeable most days. He had energy, strength, coordination. The tremors had become so rare that he sometimes forgot he had a chronic condition at all. Michael still won most of their head-to-head matchups, but now it was because he was genuinely the better player rather than because Marcus was handicapped by illness. And when Marcus did win, which happened more frequently as winter turned to spring, it felt earned rather than gifted. One Thursday in March, almost exactly 2 years since Marcus's diagnosis, something remarkable happened. The gym was packed, all the regular guys plus a few newcomers who'd heard about the run and wanted to check it out. The games were intense, competitive, everyone playing at their highest level. Marcus and Michael ended up as captains picking teams for the final game of the night, a scenario that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago when Marcus could barely walk onto the court without his legs trembling. They picked their squads, stretching and talking trash, the friendly rivalry that had developed between them now fully open and acknowledged. The game was back and forth from the start, neither team able to pull ahead by more than 2 points. Marcus hit a three-pointer from the corner. Michael answered with a drive and dunk that brought appreciative shouts from everyone watching. Raphael made a steal and layup for Marcus's team. Kevin grabbed an offensive rebound and put back for Michael's squad. They reached 14-14, game point, and the ball ended up in Marcus's hands at the top of the key with 10 seconds left. Michael was guarding him, crouched in defensive stance, that competitive fire in his eyes that Marcus had come to respect and even appreciate. Marcus took a deep breath and surveyed the court. His teammates were cutting and moving, trying to get open. But Marcus knew what this moment required. Not a safe pass, not a team play, but a statement. A declaration that he was fully back, fully healthy, fully capable of rising to the moment when it mattered most. He put the ball on the floor and attacked. Michael stayed in front of him, defending perfectly, giving up nothing. Marcus crossed over, spun, elevated for a fadeaway jumper. Michael's hand was right there, contesting at the highest point, making the shot as difficult as possible. The ball arced through the air in what seemed like slow motion. The entire gym fell silent, everyone watching its trajectory. Marcus knew before it reached the rim that it was good. The rotation was perfect, the arc ideal, the release clean. Swish. Game over. The gym erupted in chaos, guys rushing Marcus, celebrating like they'd just won a championship instead of a Thursday pickup game. But in that moment, it felt bigger than basketball. It felt like validation, like proof that perseverance pays off, that suffering can be temporary, that second chances really do exist. Michael was the first to reach him, pulling him into a tight embrace. "That's my guy right there," he shouted over the noise. "That's what I'm talking about." As the celebration continued around them, Marcus caught Michael's eye and mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Michael nodded, understanding everything those words carried. "Thank you for the medical connection. Thank you for the dignity you preserved. Thank you for the friendship you offered. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for believing I could get back to this moment even when I didn't believe it myself." Later that night, after everyone had left and Marcus was driving home through the quiet city streets, he thought about how far he'd come. 2 years ago, he'd been newly diagnosed and terrified, watching his body betray him, convinced he was going to leave Emma orphaned and alone. Now he was healthy, happy, in a relationship with a wonderful woman, and had just hit the game-winning shot against the best player in his regular pickup game. But more than any of that, he'd learned something about the nature of strength and vulnerability, about accepting help and offering it, about how competition and compassion aren't opposites but can coexist in ways that make both stronger. He'd learned that pride sometimes needs to be sacrificed for survival, that letting someone help you doesn't make you weak, that acknowledging your limitations can actually expand your possibilities. When he got home, Emma was already asleep, sprawled across her bed with a book open beside her. Marcus carefully removed the book, turned off her light, and kissed her forehead. She stirred slightly but didn't wake, secure in the knowledge that her father was there and would always be there. Marcus walked to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet, was Emma's drawing from Christmas 2 years ago. World's best dad in her careful handwriting. He'd kept it there through everything, a reminder of what he was fighting for, who he was fighting for, why giving up had never been an option. His phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Great game tonight. Same time next week?" Marcus smiled and typed back. Wouldn't miss it. And he wouldn't. Because Thursday basketball had become more than just a game or a hobby or a way to stay in shape. It had become a community, a support system, a place where men from different worlds could come together and compete and cooperate and challenge each other to be better versions of themselves. Marcus thought about the stranger who'd walked into that gym almost 2 years ago, the wealthy CEO with the expensive shoes and the confident swagger who everyone had dismissed as an arrogant outsider. And he thought about how wrong they'd all been, how Michael had turned out to be exactly what Marcus needed at exactly the right moment, not because of fate or divine intervention but because one man had chosen to look at another man's suffering and do something about it. That choice had rippled outward in ways neither of them could have predicted. Marcus's recovery had inspired other patients in the clinical trial. Michael's funding had expanded the research in ways that would help thousands of people in the future. Their friendship had shown both of them that human connection can transcend class and circumstance when people approach each other with genuine openness and respect. As Marcus climbed into bed that night, his body pleasantly tired from the game, he felt a contentment that had eluded him for years. Not happiness exactly, because happiness is fleeting and circumstantial. But something deeper. Peace. Gratitude. A sense that despite all the suffering and struggle and fear, his life had meaning and purpose and value. He thought about the game-winning shot, about Michael's defense, about that moment of truth where everything had hung in the balance. And he realized that Michael could have blocked that shot. Could have jumped higher, reached further, used all his strength and athleticism to swat the ball away. But he hadn't. He defended perfectly, forced Marcus to make an incredibly difficult shot, but he'd given him the chance to make it. And that, Marcus understood, was the ultimate gift. Not making things easy, not removing all obstacles, not guaranteeing success. But giving someone the opportunity to succeed on their own merits, to prove themselves against real competition, to earn their victory through genuine effort. Michael had done that for him, not just in this one game but across 2 years of Thursday nights. Marcus closed his eyes and allowed himself to drift toward sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new opportunities to show up and do his best. But tonight, he could rest in the knowledge that he was no longer the man he'd been 2 years ago, broken and terrified and alone. He was stronger now, not just physically but emotionally and spiritually. He'd been tested and hadn't been found wanting. He'd fallen and gotten back up. He'd accepted help and learned to offer it. He'd lost and eventually won. And through it all, he'd discovered that sometimes the greatest victories come from learning how to lose with grace, how to accept generosity with humility, how to recognize that needing help doesn't make you weak but rather opens the door to connections that make you stronger than you could ever be alone. The last thought Marcus had before sleep claimed him was a simple one, profound in its simplicity. He was grateful. Grateful for Emma, for Sarah, for Dr. Chen and the clinical trial, for the guys at the run who'd welcomed him and supported him even when they didn't fully understand what he was going through. But most of all, grateful for Michael, for the wealthy CEO who'd looked at a struggling single father and seen not a problem to be solved but a person worth fighting for. Thursday would come again. It always did. And Marcus would be there, ready to compete, ready to connect, ready to honor the gift he'd been given by living as fully and courageously as he knew how. Because that's what you do when someone helps you find your way back from the edge. You don't waste the second chance. You don't squander the opportunity. You show up, you do the work, and you pay it forward however you can. The game wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But Marcus was no longer afraid of what came next. He'd learned that with courage, community, and compassion, almost anything was possible. Even miracles that looked like basketball games. Even second chances that arrived disguised as rivals. Even hope that emerged from the darkest moments of despair. And that lesson, more than any game-winning shot or medical breakthrough, was what Marcus would carry with him for the rest of his life. The understanding that we save each other, that strength comes through vulnerability, that asking for help and offering it are two sides of the same essential human currency. That sometimes losing means winning, and sometimes the person you thought was your opponent turns out to be your greatest ally. The world outside continued its endless motion, indifferent to one man's struggles and triumphs. But inside that small apartment, in that moment of hard-won peace, Marcus Chen slept the sleep of someone who had faced the abyss and stepped back from the edge. Someone who had learned that grace comes in many forms, and that accepting it with humility and gratitude might be the bravest thing any of us can do. 3 years had passed since that first game-winning shot, and the Thursday night games had become legendary in Riverside. Word spread about the group of men who played not just for competition but for something deeper, a brotherhood built on mutual respect and unwavering support. New faces joined regularly, each bringing their own stories of struggle and resilience. Marcus stood courtside one particular Thursday evening, not as a player but as a coach. He'd started a youth basketball program 6 months earlier, funded partially by a grant from Michael's foundation and partially by community donations. 20 kids from low-income families now had access to equipment, coaching, and mentorship they wouldn't have otherwise. Emma, now 13 and towering over most of her classmates, served as a volunteer assistant, teaching younger girls the fundamentals her father had drilled into her during countless driveway sessions. Michael walked over during a water break, his hair showing more gray now but his athleticism undiminished. "The kids are looking good. You've built something special here." Marcus watched a 10-year-old named David execute a perfect layup, remembering when he'd first met the boy 6 months ago, shy and uncertain, barely able to dribble. They just needed someone to believe in them. "Same as I did." Sarah appeared from the bleachers, carrying a clipboard with permission slips for an upcoming tournament. She and Marcus had married the previous summer in a small ceremony at the community center, with Emma as maid of honor and Michael as best man. Their blended family had found a rhythm that worked, two people who understood loss and chose love anyway. The evening concluded with the youth teams playing a scrimmage while the adults watched and cheered. Afterward, as Marcus locked up the gym, Michael lingered behind. "I've been thinking about something," Michael said. "About that first year when you were sick. About how I played." "We've been through this," Marcus replied gently. "I know. But I want you to understand something I've never fully articulated. When I let you score, when I gave you those moments, I wasn't just helping you. I was learning what real strength looked like. Every Thursday, watching you show up despite everything, it taught me that courage isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up. That lesson changed how I run my company, how I treat my employees, how I show up in the world." Marcus locked the door and they walked toward the parking lot together. "We helped each other. That's what people do when they stop seeing each other as opponents and start seeing each other as human beings." Emma ran ahead to the car, laughing with Sarah about something only teenagers find hilarious. Marcus watched them, his heart full of a gratitude that had become his default state. The disease still lived in his body, would always be there requiring maintenance and vigilance. But it no longer defined him. "Same time next week?" Michael asked, the question that had become their ritual. Marcus smiled. "Always." As they drove home through streets now familiar with spring warmth, Emma asked from the back seat, "Dad, did you ever imagine your life would turn out like this?" Marcus glanced at Sarah beside him, thought about the program he'd built, the kids whose lives he was touching, the friendship that had saved him and transformed him. "No, sweetheart. I imagined something much smaller. I'm glad I was wrong." The truth was simple and profound. Sometimes the universe places people in your path not to compete with you but to complete you. Sometimes losing opens doors that winning keeps closed. Sometimes the person who seems like your rival is actually your salvation, waiting for you to be humble enough to accept their hand. Marcus had learned that lesson on a basketball court, week after week, game after game, through victories and defeats that mattered far less than the connection they forged. He'd learned that true strength isn't about standing alone but about building communities where everyone lifts each other up. Where success isn't zero-sum but multiplicative. Where giving and receiving become indistinguishable parts of the same beautiful exchange. Thursday would come again. It always did. And when it arrived, Marcus would be there, ready to play, ready to coach, ready to show others what had been shown to him. That grace exists. That second chances are real. That sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the space to be vulnerable, the permission to struggle, and the unwavering belief that they're worth fighting for. The game continues. The story never really ends. But in that moment, driving home with his family, Marcus Chen understood something essential. He'd already won everything that mattered. Not because he'd beaten his disease or hit game-winning shots, but because he'd learned to receive love when he needed it most and give it back however he could. That was the real victory. That was what Thursday nights had always been about. And that was the lesson he'd spend the rest of his life sharing with anyone willing to listen. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.